my research focuses on, for the last 8 years, on sustainable consumption and sustainable consumption in the home. So I look at particular everyday behaviours, things like waste management, energy efficiency, water use or conservation, and transport use in particular, and looking at how people interact and engage with those particular practices in the home, and try to uncover whether there's any element of sustainability within those particular behaviours. So when you look at the literature on ethical consumption or sustainable consumption, a lot of focus has been on those ethical consumers, or those consumers who are motivated to act and have taken a lifestyle choice to be sustainable to the best of their ability. But there's not a lot of research on mainstream consumers, so those, I suppose, that are more of the mass market. And how do they interact with the sustainability debate? There has been a lot, of course, of media coverage recently on sustainability, and more research is coming to the mainstream media, which I suppose allows people to be that little bit more aware. So does this awareness in any way translate into action for more mainstream consumers, those that are not necessarily sustainable or sustainability inclined? So my research takes a household perspective. I've looked at members of the household, how they interact with these practices, how they, I suppose, purchase or acquire certain items for the home, how they consume it and how they dispose of it. And what I have found is that these consumers, although they're not, they don't profess to care about the environment. They talk about it, but they don't profess any positive attitude necessarily, or any intention, certainly not to behave sustainably. But they don't necessarily care that much about it. They know it's important, but personally in their day-to-day lives, they don't profess to care that much about it. But in fact, when we talk about their behaviours in the home, things like recycling, things like water conservation to some degree, and the use of electricity, for example, we find that these consumers are in fact very sustainable within those particular practices. But that behaviour is far more passive in nature than it has been recorded for the ethical consumers. So what we find, particularly in Ireland, is that those mainstream or mass consumers are in fact quite sustainable in some practices, but more passively. So when you ask them about the environment, they're not going to tell you they care about it. And I suppose past research has looked at attitudes and intentions as a predictor of behaviour. But when we focus in on behaviour, we see that they actually are being sustainable, but just not motivated by that. It's more enabled. So it's enabled by waste management companies, or it's because of the cost of electricity, for example. So what's really interesting here is that when we look at the sustainability discourse, and we're trying to, I suppose, increase sustainable consumption all of the time, what we find, or what my research has found, is that consumers are in fact, changing, incrementally changing, and that's usually because of institutional structures or external forces that are put on them. So their attitudes aren't changing. They don't care that much, or certainly their intentions aren't positive towards environmental behaviour, but their actual behaviour is sustainable. So I think this is a very promising area of research.